When it comes to the 2024 season in the NFL, it pays to be special for the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's get into it here on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, friends and neighbors. Chiefs Kingdom around the world, nice to see you. We're brought to you today by FanDuel. You can make every single moment more by joining FanDuel, and $200 is going to come back to you if you are a new customer just for winning a $5 bet. Place one $5 bet and win it, and you get $200 back in bonus bets at FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We're going to get started here today as we start taking a look forward at what training camp will bring, certainly into the preseason and on into the regular season. We're going to cover some topics for you. This is Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner. You can find him at KCChiefsCorner.com. I'm Brian Tracy, the founder of Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting. You can find me at RogueAPC.com as well as NFL33.com and RGR Football here on YouTube. Lot to cover today. We appreciate you being with us. If you want all the information in the text line, if that's easier for you, and you want breaking news, it's at 816-357-8781. We have a great show for you. Return is going to be a big question mark in this coming season for the special teams. Who are those game changers that are going to play the bigger role, and how is the special teams going to shift in this season? And we start with just what is it to be a specialist. Things have changed in Kansas City, and there are a lot going on with the special teams. Harrison Butker is going to be Harrison Butker. I do believe that's controversy aside in his offseason. On the field through training camp, he's going to be his normal self, except for the fact that my question to you, Chris, I don't think he has a designated holder at this point that he's comfortable with. I don't know how he could, because it doesn't seem that you've had enough reps with anyone at this point in OTAs. What do you think is the best option for the holder role for Harrison Butker?
Well, I think the holder role is probably going to go to Matt Ariza. At least that's what I am understanding at this point, is that they're wanting to continue to have the punter be that guy. Ryan Reckow had experience. Ariza doesn't. So that's going to be interesting to see how that changes. It's possible they're going to go a different direction. But the past two holders that they've had have been the punter. It's been Colquitt and it's been Tommy Townsend. So I would think that that would be the direction that they want to continue to go, because the other side of it that you get into is if it's somebody else, then it's also somebody else that you are likely to need on the roster at all times. So I would think that, they'd want to go the punter. You mentioned Harrison Butker. The interesting thing to me is he is going to be the same guy he always is, but he may not be kicking near as much this year as he has in the past, because I'm not so sure he'll be doing the kickoffs.
And that's what I wanted to get to. Specialist is a term in the NFL that's been around for a long time. You have one for the kicking duties, quote unquote, meaning placement kicking. You have another for the punting that we'll get into who's joining the game changers here in a bit on the punting side. James Winchester is still the long snapper. I think he's been in the league 17 years at this point, but he's going nowhere, and he's going to be snapping for you again. But now great. It comes into yeah, absolutely, yeah. My omission of speaking about James Winchester is that there's absolutely nothing bad to say. So what can you do? But I wonder if we don't see a designated kickoff specialist role become apparent, as they've been experimenting all spring with not just Louis Rees-Zammit, the rugby player with a lot of kicking experience, both on the run and from a placement, right? But with Justin Reed as well, who we've seen take some place kicks in the past. I think that's the best way to go and save Harrison Butker from the wear and tear of trying to make tackles in what will be an evolving special teams role. Do you think that's worth it?
I do. And, you go back and you listen to Dave Tope talk about this special teams change. And one of the things that he said was when they went back and they looked at the XFL and the UFL, and they looked at how often the kicker, the guy that was kicking the ball, was involved in the play. You have them involved in the play close to 25% of the time tackling. That has never been the case when you start talking about kickoffs. Usually the kickoff, the kicker is maybe involved in it maybe 2 or 3% of the time if somebody breaks loose, but you're okay with those types of odds. 25% is a lot different, and Harrison Butker is one of the best kickers in the league. You do not want him out there on those types of plays trying to tackle somebody a quarter of the time.
Well, And I'll tell you the other, I agree with you completely. And I'll tell you the other aspect of it is where you're not looking for putting it through the back of the end zone any longer. The philosophy of kickoffs is going to change. And without that, I don't know that you need him there. I want to see this camp battle go on. And I want to see the guys in particular, Reese Zammit and Reed, compete for it. Now, there's two sides of it that I'm sure we'll get to in the next segment, but that would be the way that I would approach camp, is that put those guys in where they're getting reps every day on the special teams.
Well, and I think it's also going to be interesting to watch and see how teams attack it this year, because if you get up by 2 scores, are you going to care about field position in the second half if you're scoring a touchdown or you're scoring? At that point, maybe you put your kicker back in and you just have him boot the ball out of the end zone. Who cares about field position near as much, because you're up by a lot and you want to save your defensive player, specifically in this situation, Justin Reed. If he's the guy that ends up winning it, maybe you want to save him and have him be able to be out there and not have him kick off, especially if you're talking about, 6, 7, 8 scores. I mean, that's possible when you start talking, field goals and touchdowns.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. How it plays out together as a unit, I think, is something we're probably going to see some change with. But who could take on those roles and what should they be? That's going to come up here next on the Locked On Podcast Network. It is that time. Summer is here, and I know the temperatures are climbing. So is the interest in baseball. You can get all kinds of action going for your favorite MLB teams, or just the ones that happen to be playing today. Right now, new customers are getting $200 back in bonus bets for just winning a $5 bet. You can do it all, whether it's the finals MVPs that you might have had a chance at last week, to who's going to hit that dinger today and take it out of the park. You can do it all. Anything that you're looking for, from those wins to props on specific players, over at FanDuel.com/lockedon. And you can win a big summer bucket right now getting into the action. It's $200 back on a $5 win. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get in the action today. At FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you want 24/7 coverage of all the sports that interest you from local experts that know their teams, check out Locked On Sports today. It's here on YouTube, where you can like and sub, and on Amazon Fire TV. I'm excited here because I feel like we're going to talk about kick returners here coming up here in a bit. But I think the game changers right now are for the first time in adapting, especially the XFL rules, I feel like this is more of a strategic play now. It's not turn around and walk away from the TV time anymore, which has been, the case for a lot of years, despite some rule changes in trying to make it more exciting. I'd like the concept, and I think the league is going for still reducing collisions, but changing the way that you go about it. And for me, we've mentioned this a couple times, but I think it's a shift away from necessarily flat out speed, long speed. Those wide receivers that have 40-yard dashes that you really covet for gunner positions. I think it's more about linebackers and running backs at this point to be guys that can cover the short area and really take on collisions. Is that what you see happening with the units as a whole?
Yeah, I think that, in the past, it's you have gunners that are coming from your wide receivers or your corners, and that could possibly change this year. Kansas City is, I believe, kept only 5 linebackers the past couple of years. And now I think that they're going to be in a situation where they're going to have to keep 6 because of special teams. And is that going to mean that there's going to be one less wide receiver? Is it going to be one less corner? Is it going to be one less somewhere else? I mean, who knows? We'll see. But the point is that I think you're right. I think that you're going to have situations where it's going to be on linebackers. It's going to be on running backs. It's going to be on those types of players to see if you can get, the guy down. It's not going to be on. I mean, you're going to have corners and wide receivers on there. Don't get me wrong. They will be there. They're just not going to be the same types of corners and wide receivers as you had before. Maybe you're going to go for a little bit bigger guy that's going to be able to take, the block on a little bit differently. Maybe that's another way that it shifts is you look at keeping somebody that has a different body style and different temperament, different skill set. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
When not necessarily speed, but size. Miles Battle, perhaps. Not saying he makes it, but that's just an example.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think the body types need to change, and that changes the game. And that's why we're talking about game changers here, folks, is that the kickoff rules are changing, yes, but the people that need to execute them best is changing as well. And the one thing that I haven't really gotten my head around yet is I think we're going to see a lot of experimentation based on the rules. There are special teams coaches out there right now cooking up things, including Dave Tobe, that I'm never going to think of. So I can't tell you how it's going to look, but like onside kicks in particular, I think are going to be very, very interesting at this point, especially if you've changed who is on your roster on a given game day. But it comes down to the fact that they are trying to make it a bit more exciting, a bit more of a close proximity game, so you don't have these long stretches down the field. Everybody starts a lot closer, and the rules in particular about where the ball comes out to if they don't return it, I think is what's really changing here. So I'm looking for skill sets. I want returners that can do X, Y, and Z. We're going to talk about them coming up, but I need guys that can cover and tackle as good as maybe 20 years ago when tackling was the name of the game, right? We've seen that slide for the last 15 years. And now you have to be sure-handed, you have to be good in short area, and you have to be able to take somebody's center of gravity and bring it to the ground.
Well, and you have to wonder if it's also going to be, we've been talking mostly covering kicks, but flip it over to the other side, and we'll talk about returners here in a minute, but who's going to be the guys that are up front? Who are going to be the 9 front guys for the 2 returners in the back? I would not be surprised if you see more tight ends in that type of role. Get a little bit more size, have a little bit more speed, guys that have the ability to at least block a little bit. I'm looking at, I'm looking at Wiley as an example of a guy that could be out there on the kickoff team. Noah Gray's not really known for the size and known for the blocking, but maybe he's another guy. Irv Smith, those types of players, I think, are also going to be involved in this because it's different than what it has been in the past. Like you would still have a Noah Gray out there on special teams in kick return and kick coverage at times, but it's a different skill set as to what is going to need to be done for those guys to be on the field and how they're going to do it, and the different blocking schemes you're going to be talking about and how that's going to play into all of this. And it goes back to the same thing of talking about the corners and the wide receivers. Corners, you're not going to necessarily think about blocking, but are you going to think about keeping a little bit of a bigger wide receiver that maybe gives you a little bit better ability to block because he can play that special teams role for you? It all plays into it. It's going to be fascinating to watch how this turns out this first year.
Yeah, I agree. I think the term, at least of the preseason, but certainly most of the season, I think is going to be field position based on how these plays evolve from week P1 through week 18. I think it's going to be quite different. But who makes the impact? Go ahead.
I was just going to say the thing that's always fun to me is to watch how special teams units change over the season and how they attack different things. It's going to be a wild, wild west out there this year because you're going to have, you get out there for the first game, Kansas City's going to be trotting out something, Baltimore's going to be trotting out something, and then the next week somebody is going to look at what they did and say, okay, how can we attack that? And it's just going to be something that is going to evolve the entire season. It's going to be a lot more fun and a lot more exciting the entire year.
I agree. And I think nothing's more exciting than the return game. That's changing as well. How can the Chiefs take advantage of it? It's coming up next here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Special teams is always fun, but you go back to the Dante Hall years, you go back to seeing Dat do some interesting things. Like the return game brings the sparks. And I think what's really intriguing to me that maybe not everybody's caught up on is that it's going to be a lot of duos. Like in old school, you're not going to have the up back returner so much as you're going to have options with 2 guys in the back ready to receive. I think that changes the game yet again, but it makes individual talents, I think, stand out that much more. There's plenty of talent on this roster. How do you see them trying to at least start the season in this concept of a 2-back scenario?
It's going to be interesting because how do you play those two guys and who's going to be your skill set guys? We've talked about, they've talked about Reese Zammit being their starting kickoff guy. I mean, Tobes already said that he thinks that he can be that guy. And so we're sitting here right now before training camp starts thinking that he's going to be one of those guys that's back there. And, okay, so if he's back there, who's the other one going to be? Is it going to be a guy like McCole Hardman? Is it going to be like Kadarius Toney? Who's going to be the other guy? And how are they going to set things up? Because you can't control where they're going to kick the ball. So you can't necessarily control who's going to be returning it. So the return game, I mean, just all of that is in general is going to be fascinating to watch and see how they, change things the entire season. But right now, I would say we know Reese Zammit. I don't know who's going to be the second guy. It will be fascinating to see who they use in that role. Hardman makes sense. Toney kind of makes sense to some degree. Worthy, I think you can make an argument, could make sense at times. So it's just going to depend on what we're able to see in training camp and who they feel more comfortable with. And I also would imagine that it's not always going to be the same two guys. Like you might have Reese Zammit if he's your one of your starters. Maybe you have specific plays that you have somebody else in there instead of Reese Zammit, or it's replacing the other guy. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
I agree with you, but I don't think this was a miscalculation by the Kansas City Chiefs. I think they are in prime position to make the most out of this rule change. And I'll say it now so that everybody can remember it's now June 14 as we record this, folks. There will be pitches in this return game with Reese Zammit back there. There is no way around it. Will he be receiving them or will he be pitching them? I don't know. But in years past, you would say, hey, your two returners, if you're going to put two out there, probably want to have similar skill sets, right? I can see two different ways where maybe you want a running back, maybe Pacheco or somebody with that kind of skill set, who then, should he get the ball, can get upfield a little bit, but so that he can pitch to Reese Zammit and let him do what he does in rugby. In this formation, it's going to look more like rugby than any other play in football. So if anything plays into his skill set as a pitch receiver, it would be that scenario. But I think the opposite is true too, because every rugby player has to be able to pitch as well as receive it. And so if you're going to make a pair, I would want to put blasting side straight line speed next to him. Because if he catches that ball and is able to maneuver laterally like he can, and then pitches to say, a guy that runs 4-2-1, and poof, there's a crease and he's gone. That is a winning formula in my mind, and I would like to see that.
Yeah, and it's going to be just thinking about the dynamics of how this is going to look and the dynamics of how teams are going to try to cover. I mean, it's completely different than what it was before. You're going to have an idea of where the ball's going to go when you're covering the kick, but you're still going to have you're not going to get up the speed that you normally would. And your angle is going to be way different depending on where the ball is going to go. So it's going to be fascinating to see how things evolve, because the angle, I mean, say you kick to the left and your guys on the far right, they're going to have a much different angle than, the guys that are going to be right in front of it where the kick is going. And that can cause, when you start talking about pitches, that can cause some problems. That's where it could be a lot of fun. I agree with you. I think that's one of I think that could be something that the Chiefs are going to take advantage of. And it's just so much different than it was last year. And I'm really curious to see what's, Dave Tobe brings about, but I'm also curious, I'll be honest, I'm really curious to see what the rest of the league brings about. There's some great special teams coordinators out there. I want to see what the league does, because this is a league of copycat to an extent. So we're going to see some interesting things, I would imagine, on the kickoffs this year.
Yeah, I agree. The X factors for me, the guys that can be in this return game and actually do some interesting things. Obviously, Zammit's one, Worthy's another. I don't know so much about KT, only because I'm not sure that's enough in this scenario to get done. It feels like it needs to be a more quick hitting play. But the other one that comes to mind to me, and I'm sure we'll talk about him in the coming weeks here, is another guy that can do, if you remember the Titans miracle play from a decade or two ago, Jared Wiley was a quarterback at one point, will be on special teams. If he's one of those backs that receives it and you can actually throw it across the formation at a crease to your partner that is more of a straight line speed guy, I can see that scenario working out pretty well too.
Well, I'd have to go back and look at the rules, but I'm also curious, can you use more than just I know you can only have 2 guys back, but can those guys that are up front be somebody that gets the ball at some point? So
Yeah,
maybe it's not Wiley's back there with Reese Zammit. Maybe he's up on the front line and he just drops back and somebody runs it up and he's next to him and they do something that way. I don't know. I mean, there's so many different things that we don't know and how this is going to work. And it's going to be fascinating to see how this works because it's all new. And
who
the
I
Chiefs
feel
are going to
bad
be
for?
trying to figure it out. What was that?
You know who I feel bad for?
Who's that?
The guys at EA that have to come up with these special teams plays in Madden, because I don't know how they're going to do it.
Yeah, that's going to be something that's going to be that'll be something that'll be different this year for sure. And you talk about the different returners. Hardman, KT. We'll see if either of those guys worthy. If he's back there, there's lots of different ways that they could go with this. And maybe it's somebody that, you talk about Wiley, maybe it's somebody we haven't even talked about. Maybe it's a running back. Maybe it's another running back and they do something completely different. Maybe it's a guy like Deneric Prince. It's just, I don't know how they're going to play this because it is so much different than it has been in the past. And you have to know the rules. And the one thing that we do know about this Chiefs team is they drill the rules into this team all the time. And I guarantee you this is going to be something that they're going to be drilling into their heads a ton at training camp.
I completely agree. We hope that you will join us for that. We are going to run up to training camp. Every facet of this team, from position reviews to front office decisions, who's available, is there trades worth having at this point? So don't miss it. Be with us 5 days a week as we are all summer long. We appreciate you being with us today. We're going to continue this streak. So like, sub, and hit the bell here on YouTube. And make sure that you're subscribed on the audio platforms as well. Enjoy your evening. We appreciate you listening to us today, and we'll be back with you tomorrow.